Well, howdy doody, geographers. Well-being is the topic. And the question, does well-being vary in India? My guess would be yes. Let's explore. Okay, learning goals. You're going to know how and why population changes. And we're going to give you a task where you're going to develop your skills of thinking creatively. So how and why is India's population changing? I hear you ask. India's going to have more people than China by 2050. There you go, it's growing quicker. It's going to have 1.6 billion. It's got about 1.1 at the moment. Why isn't its population increased? Because they've got a better water supply, so you don't die from drinking unsafe water. There's less disease in India now. There's better education. People with better educations live longer. Go school. People are still having big families. So most societies' family size has gotten smaller, but in India, a lot of people still having big families because lots of children still pass away when they're young, so people have replacement children. Children are still needed as workers for the family. There's not enough good access to contraceptives, right? So most of those problems have been solved in Australia, which is why we don't have big families here. Here's a graph showing the population. Well, I'm not going to tell you. Have a look at that graph. What's the red line showing? What's the blue line showing? Has it got belts? It's got a border, yeah. Axis labels. No, it doesn't say what the numbers down the bottom are. Legend, sort of, with the India and China in red and blue. Title, yes. Source, yes. So, what's this graph telling us? Yep, it's saying from 1950 the population of both countries shot up really quickly. China's is due to peak at about 2025 and then start going down. India's is going to peak in 2050 and then start going down, but it's going to pass China before 2050 according to that data. Here's another graph. I want you to think about what that's showing. It doesn't have a vertical axis at all, so what do you think the percentages mean? Yep, the percentages are the percent of people who are living in extreme poverty. And what's the general message of this graph? Yes, the general message is that extreme poverty in China and India is dropping very dramatically. Look at the drop in China, that's insane. They used to have 84% of people in extreme poverty and now it's only, well, it's probably less than 10 now. Wicked. Must be doing something right. Right. If this is too confusing for you, just tune out for the next 30 seconds or a minute while I explain it. This is what's called the demographic transition graph. Okay, so countries go through these 5 stages. The black line represents the death rate, how many people die. If you've got a high death rate, that's probably because people die of accidents and lots of diseases and your healthcare's not that great. The sort of bluey line is the birth rate. That's how many babies get born. Countries, more traditional countries, have lots of children. Why? For farming, lots of them die when they're young. No family planning, no contraception, right? So, in stage 1, if you've got a high death rate and high birth rate, your population's not going to go anywhere. Yeah, lots of babies, but heaps of people die, so your population stays pretty steady. Then you get to this stage where your birth rate stays high, but your death rate decreases because of improvements in medical care, clean water, and fewer children dying. But you still have a high birth rate. Now, if you've got a high birth rate and a low death rate, what's the result? Yeah, more people, your population goes up, because more of them are being born, but they're not dying as early. So we still have some countries in the world that are like that, for example, Egypt, Kenya, and India. Then, as there's the demographic transition generally means the demographic transition to having smaller families, having a low birth rate. Yeah. So, for example, in Brazil, their birth rate is dropping, and their death rate's dropping, but their birth rate's still quite high, so the population's still going up. Then you get the state 4, where the birth rates massively come down. Yeah, later marriages, more women in the workforce, smaller numbers of families, smaller families. You know, like most people I know these days only have one or two kids. You hardly hear of people having 4 or 5 kids, whereas that was quite common even like 50 years ago. So heaps of the developed world, Australia would fall into category 4, low stationary. Yeah, small increase. In fact, if Australia didn't have any immigration, people coming in, Australia's population would be dropping. Our fertility rate is too low to replace our population naturally. Then you have the situation where the birth rate continues to fall, and it actually goes down so far that your population starts declining. Most countries are moving towards this status. Yeah. By and large, the stages come one after the other. Most communities go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, and most places are either in 3, 4 or 5. Heaps of the countries that you can think of, like the rich ones, the developed ones, are in stage 4, and quite a few are now in stage 5. So that's why demography is a study of population statistics. That's why demographers think that the world's population is going to peak at about 10 billion, and then it's going to come down. So obviously population increase is a concern for environmentalists. However, population is going to peak soon, maybe in the next 100 years or so. Anyway. Okay, regional variation in well-being and population in India. So some parts of India are much poorer than others. Eastern India is the poorest, and I'll show you a map in a second. Here we go. Have a look at that, and I want you to think for yourself what's going on. Yep, so the darker the red, the bigger percentage of your total population in that state is in poverty. So yeah, the eastern areas. The far north and the far south are the most wealthy according to that map. Reading, I want you to read chapter 10.8. Please answer these 3 simple questions, including the question stem in your answer. Why is India's population still increasing? Where is the poorest area in India? And why are Indians still having big families? Include the question and the answer. So question 1 will say, India's population is increasing because blah blah blah. Okay, here's a fun creative thinking activity. Here are 3 things: better water supply, better education, and less disease. 3 reasons why India's population has increased. I want you to do 2 things. Firstly, give me one way that thing could be improved. How could your water supply be improved even more? How could your education be improved even more, like for a whole country? How could you have even less disease than you currently have? Yep. Then see where the little arrows are. Explain the link between the 3. So what's the link between water supply and disease? What's the link between water supply and education? What's the link between disease and education? So draw that little diagram and then do the activities. Here's a video about India's wealth and poverty.
India, the land of wealth and the land of poverty. India has dethroned France and the United Kingdom as the 5th and 6th economic power, respectively. Today, with more than 1.3 billion inhabitants, grows at a breakneck rate of 7.3%, one of the fastest growing economies on the planet. In 2050, India will have a larger economy than the US, and by 2075, it is very likely to move past China, becoming the #1 economy on the planet. Each year, several Indian billionaires join the list of the richest in the world. proof of the country's economic growth. With a human overpopulation of more than 1.3 billion people, India in a few years will surpass China as the most populated country in the world. It is very possible that it will surpass 1.7 billion by 2070. At that time, the Earth will have an estimated 10 billion human beings. Let me put it this way, that means that in the future, 2 out of 10 of all humans on the planet will be Indian or live in the country. India will soon become a world-class power, but its inequality presents a risk to the planet. Almost 25% of the world's poor are found in India, and ironically today, India is as rich as France. How is it possible that a country that is crowned as the 5th largest power in the world has more than a quarter of its people below the poverty line? Today, we will see the contrasting sides of India and answer this question because it is so wealthy yet impoverished at the same time. Let's begin. There's no denying that India is a rich country. Today, it has a gross domestic product of $2.4 trillion, wealthier than both France and Great Britain, and in 2 years it will surpass Germany. The catch is, this enormous wealth is not as evenly distributed as other economies in that tier. The inequality in India is one of the most problematic in the world. The richest 1% of all Indians pocket nearly 1/3 of the excess wealth generated by the economic growth between 1984 and 2014. That is, almost 1/3 of this income went to a group of only 8 million people in a country with a population of 1.3 billion. Let's illustrate this further. Imagine that we have a country of 150 people. In the case of India, a single person hoards more than 1/3 of the money between all of them, leaving the rest of the 2/3 of the wealth to be divided with the rest of the 149 people. I'm sure most of you watching right now will imagine the richest 1% as these billionaires as in other more developed Western countries. But if we actually take a look at how much an average individual of this 1% truly make, we realize that it doesn't take that much money to be a part of this exclusive group. So what do I mean by this? Let me explain more. So how much do the richest 1% of Indians really earn? The average income of this exclusive group is around $20,000 per year. That is roughly $1,800 to $2,000 per month. You could say that this is a lot of money, but compared to the Western powers such as Germany, France, or even Spain, that barely even qualifies as a medium wage income. That same 1% of Indians is now 10 times richer than 35 years ago, while the practically non-existent middle class has not even managed to double their income in the past 40 years of continuous economic growth. With their efforts since then, they have managed to increase the majority of their population $2 a day to a staggering $3 per day. If you're lucky, then you can even make $5 a day. 1 out of every 5 Indians is in extreme poverty. Extrapolating that data to the total population, 1 in 5 of individuals earn less than $2 per day. This would give us a figure of around 270 to 350 million individuals. In comparison, if all those found in poverty in India had their own country, they would be the 3rd most populated country on the planet, just after India itself. 80% of the poor live in rural areas, away from large urban centers such as New Delhi or Mumbai. The poorest 40% of the Indian population lives equal to or worse than their Southeast Asian neighbors such as Bangladesh and Laos. The most shocking aspect of India is its absence of a middle class. In one of the richest and ironically most unequal societies on the planet, tens of millions of Indians still cannot read, and millions will never have quality education, decent health, or even an opportunity to escape poverty. When India gained independence from England, it had more than 70% of its population below the poverty line. Today, India has made significant progress in reducing that percentage to only 21%, and only 10 years ago, this percentage was at 31%. So, there are clear advances of course, but the structures of inequality are still present to this day and will continue to prevent the growth of income of the poorest Indians in a proportionate or equal rate. Why is this inequality so present? That's a great question, but there is no single answer. There are thousands of factors that come into play, literally thousands, but today we will only cover the most evident ones. Firstly, the poor quality of education for a large part of the Indian population. I'm referring to the more than 30% of the population being illiterate. That's almost more than 400 million people. The illiterate population of India is almost equal to the entire population of the South American continent. This problem is significantly worse for women. For women, the literacy rate is pretty much dead 50%, meaning half of all Indian women still cannot read or write. Now obviously, this part of the population has not had the opportunity to go through a system of a primary, secondary, and university education. This is millions of brains and potentially brilliant minds that will never reach their maximum potential. On the other hand, the fortunate people who have had this secondary and university education will automatically perform better in life, raise their standards of living, and if they have children, they will surely have the same or better educational opportunities as their parents. These individuals are sure to gain a much higher income than the illiterate 30% of their society. It is not surprising that Indian billionaires control over 54% of the nation's wealth. Even so, it's not a hopeless case. Every year, more and more people are becoming literate, and the current literacy rate among young men is 90%, and that of young women is at 81%, which shows that over the years, more and more of the population is becoming educated and therefore have access to better living standards. These changes will take decades to show a real demographic and economic change, but for the majority of the illiterate adult population, it is likely that they will stay that way for the rest of their lives, while the youngest are the ones which would be more inclined in pursuing continuous education. The second reason for the current state of India is the intrusion and control of the state. When the state maintains a strict control of the economy and does not let the market operate freely, and many restrictions are put in place, there will not be many winners in the market. Over the decades, the Indian government has grown more flexible, but it still maintains a strict control of the economy, with statism encompassing every market. With this in place, we can anticipate a lot of corruption, and with it present in all levels, statism influences peddling and obstruction of justice. The interference of the Indian state has hindered competitiveness, therefore allowing only a small group of people to become extremely wealthy. India is currently a democracy, the largest democracy in the world, but ironically, it's probably the decades of statism that could have been responsible for the equality issues in the country. But now, things are changing. Since 1991, the country has become a free market economy. Since 2014, Narendra Modi, an Indian nationalist, has been the Prime Minister of India, and his focus was on privatization and liberalization on the economy based on a neoliberal framework. Modi liberalized India's foreign direct investment policies, allowing more foreign investment in several industries, including defense and railroads. Other reforms included the elimination of many of the country's labor laws to make it more difficult for workers to form unions and make it easier for employees to hire and fire. These reforms were met with the support of the institutions such as the World Bank, but the opposition of scholars within the country. The third reason of the current state of India is its poorly written laws and a collapsing health system. Governing a country of more than 1.3 billion people is not easy. Like other states in the world, India is a federation, composed of 29 states and 7 territorial unions. To give us a clear example, the most populous state in India, Uttar Pradesh, has a population of more than 200 million people, almost twice the entire population of all of Mexico. Each state has its own laws and regulations, which sometimes don't even agree with each other. Most laws are sometimes unethical, unclear, or simply poorly written. This, along with the corruption that is present in almost all Indian institutions, has done some serious structural damage to the country. Thousands of political scientists have argued that bad laws, unethical government practices, and corruption have seriously aggravated the Indian health system. This is evident from the fact that India has one of the highest infant mortality rates in the world. This deplorable state of health and infant mortality within the country has caused concern among several international organizations. While globally most countries show significant improvements in infant and child mortality rates, India is lacking in their rate of progress. Since the beginning of this video, more than 20 children under the age of 5 have died due to a lack of medical attention. The Indian Constitution establishes that the country has a universal health system, meaning all Indian citizens have the right to be treated free of charge at hospitals and receive medicine at no cost. This is very clear and ideal in theory, but in practice, the health system is so chaotic and problematic and experiences a lack of medicine, oxygen tanks, electricity, drinking water, or even syringes. Many individuals prefer private hospitals that generally provide better quality and service, but are typically too costly for ordinary citizens. There are thousands of other causes for which India still maintains such a large socio-economic gap. As the country grows more and more, there are many economic reforms being put in place in hopes of reducing this gap between the social classes, because of course, the country is getting richer. Today, a poor Indian is still twice as rich as they would be 30 years ago, but at the same time, a rich Indian is 10 times richer than 30 years ago. Obviously, the classes are not improving at an equal and proportionate rate, which doesn't allow for a fair redistribution of wealth. In terms of GDP, yes, India has surpassed France and the UK in wealth, but in reality, it needs to raise the living standards of its average citizen, increase the rate of enrollment in a school system, increase literacy, reduce corruption, reduce the birth rate, and promote more development programs for the most disadvantaged. Each year, more than 27 million Indians are born, all with their own goals and aspirations. The Indian political class must make more of an effort in order to ensure that each new life being born into India will be born into a more prosperous future to believe in, not only for India, but for the sake of the stability of the planet. It is possible that India could have more than 2 billion inhabitants by 2100. Such a large population could bring wars, political instability, stress on the availability of food, and in turn, a higher level of famine. So I pass the question off to you. What do you think is the best solution in order to reduce the gap of socio-economic classes within India? Do you think the state of overpopulation in the country is making it impossible for the social equality to stabilize? Let us know in the comments below. See you next time.
reflection activity today in your exercise book. I want you to draw up a CSI table. So thinking about poverty in India, what color represents it best? What symbol? So just a simple little symbol. And then what image? Draw a little picture. Do that in your exercise book. Thanks for participating in today's lesson. Don't ever forget to keep it real.